If you believe a majority of 535 people have the right to coercively rule 330 million strangers, you do not believe in equality. Welcome to Keith Knight, Don't Tread on Anyone. This is the libertarian case against general claims of inequality and the case for real libertarian equality. It's important to remember that the existence of inequality does not justify violence. For example, you are a 1%er if you make $32,350 per year and live in the United States. Now, when people talk about the 1%, they generally only refer to a geographical area consisting of Americans in the year 2019, which is odd, considering it's probably the wealthiest place on Earth, probably the wealthiest country. And that doesn't that doesn't apply to 95% of the populace. If this is really, they care about equality, you cannot have one standard for Americans and a different standard for non-Americans. It's no different than having a standards for whites and a standards for Hispanics and a standard for Asians. We have to have one principal standard if we believe in equality by definition. And just because you are 1,000 times wealthier than someone in Haiti, I am so sorry for that person in Haiti. I really hope we can export some copies of Free to Choose and Bastiat's The Law and Anatomy of the State, and hopefully they can become wealthy as well. They don't have the right to initiate violence against 1%ers across the world just because they themselves are poor. And this inequality shows up in a number of ways, even with groups. So, for example, men tend to be 80% of suicides, but just because that inequality exists doesn't mean men are necessarily oppressed. Men are 93% of incarcerated prisoners. That is inequality that does not result from oppression. So the fact that inequality is something that exists does not mean that it's inherently unjust. It most likely is the result of different choices. Workplace fatalities. This is why men make more money in general, because they take more risk both physically and financially, and why men are most homicide victims, and why men are a majority of the homeless. This is not because women are oppressing men. This is because men make different decisions. Now, an actual example of male oppression is the draft, where by law, every male over the age of 18 to 40 has to serve in banker wars, or whatever they're selling us at the time. Also, just because things are unequal doesn't mean people aren't on net better. For example, if you look at items such as a washing machine, clothes dryer, dishwasher, refrigerator, stove, microwave, color TV, DVD, video, cassette player, personal computer, telephone, cell phone, air conditioner. A lot of people had those in the year 1970, and more people had them. This is only referring to American statistics, where in 2005, more poor people had these than all households 35 years prior. So in just 35 years' time, people had a drastic improvement in the standard of living. It's also important to notice a washing machine in 1970 is not nearly as nice and up-to-date as one in 2005, or a TV that is technically color. So these things are not only cheaper, they're not only available to more people than they were beforehand, they're of higher quality in every case, especially cell phones. Take cell phones, for example. Another way that we see inequality is in viewership. So, for example, Real Time with Bill Maher has 1.76 million subscribers on YouTube. I have quite a few less. I haven't checked recently. He has 781 million views on YouTube. Now, that of course is ridiculous, that people watch absolute nonsense, get nothing in return except cultural Marxism and logical fallacies. But hey, if they want to watch that, it's terribly unequal because he has so many more subscribers than me. He has like 99 times the subscribers that I do. So the fact that this inequality exists does not justify me saying, government, there's inequality. Therefore, you should force his viewers to watch my channel. And if any of those viewers are caught watching his channel, put those viewers in jail and shoot them if they resist. It is fundamentally no different than the inequality of wealth that they say, well, too many people shop at Amazon. So instead of Bezos getting the money, government needs to take the money, give it to me, and shoot everyone who resists. Well, look at the great champions of inequality standing for the masses, the Young Turks. 4.5 million subscribers and 4.9 billion, with a B, views on YouTube. Don't they believe in equality? Shouldn't that number be much closer to the couple 100,000 that I have? I mean, these people really support inequality. Along with Secular Talk, 624 million views, 755,000 subscribers. The Majority Report with Sam Seder, 282 million views, 708,000 subscribers. And this also applies to their Twitter as well. Sam Seder has 125,000 followers on Twitter. Kyle has 224,000. Bill Maher, 11 million. Barack Obama, the champion of inequality, the man coming to bring peace among the races, 110 million followers on Twitter, and the Young Turks, 389,000 Twitter followers. These are the champions of inequality, yet they have the most unequal distribution of views and followers you can imagine. Think of how much of a power differential that creates. If they want one of their thoughts heard, they tweet it and millions of people hear about it. When I want one of my thoughts heard, I complain for 23 years on all platforms and maybe I get 1,000 people. So, I mean, if these people really believed in equality, they would believe in forcing their viewers and followers to follow me and to subscribe to me. And, of course, they'd have to go to jail if they resisted. But inequality, this is nothing, this is what we'd expect to happen when there is, a degree of freedom. Look at how people, when they are free, choose to sleep with who they want to. There's no equality in things like this. Look at the inequality of looks that people have. We would never expect in any, semi-sane society for things to be equal. We'd expect radical degrees of inequality. Oh, look, some people are fat, some people are in good shape, therefore inequality exists and the state should step in and violently oppress one group to assist another. Well, no, just because inequality exists doesn't justify initiating violence. If you want to help the overweight people, by all means, do it to the best of your ability, but don't initiate violence. If you look at the inequality in authors between Krugman, Stephen King, J.K. Rowling, well, there is so much inequality. They have probably billions of readers between the three of them. And I, let's say, have a little bit less than billions of readers of the articles that I've written. This is something we'd totally expect. This is not the fault of capitalism. Blaming capitalism or freedom or free markets for inequality is like blaming ink and paper for the unequal distribution of readers that I have versus J.K. Rowling. What freedom does is it reveals this inequality that exists in between us. Another case of radical inequality is people with great singing voices, people with great acting abilities, people that are very popular, and some people are not popular. It's a very similar distribution to the top 0.1%. Well, what percentage of people are as famous as Adele, Beyonce, Kim Kardashian, Taylor Swift, and Kylie Jenner? Well, for the same reason we see a drastic amount of inequality in income, we would also see the same amount of inequality in all these other aspects of life. Consider sports. No one's as rich as Jeff Bezos, therefore he got it unjustly. Well, no one's as good as Michael Jordan or Tom Brady or Derek Jeter. If so, there's like 2 or 3 others. And there's a couple people who are as rich as Jeff Bezos, but these inequalities that arise when people are free are not something to, hate and be bitter about. There's something to embrace and love about the diversity of the world. What percentage of comedians or what percentage of people are as funny as Chris Rock, Jerry Seinfeld, and Brian Regan? a microscopic percentage. So yeah, that's why you see a microscopic percentage of people have most of the wealth. In the same way, a microscopic amount of people have the most amount of attention when it comes to comedy or movie directing. James Cameron, Martin Scorsese, and Quentin Tarantino. What percentage of people can write and direct a movie as well as these guys can? Of course not. Consider Alexander Graham Bell, Alexander Fleming, Einstein, Hawking, Tesla. These are all geniuses who have a great deal of inequality with the rest of the human race. Now, look at all those examples of inequality and just realize, one, that just because they're unequal doesn't justify the state initiating violence against them to give more to me, because as we saw earlier, we can still benefit in societies that are free, relatively free, and unequal. You have to recognize that genius comes in many forms. Some people are really good at football. Some people just really know how to get the price of oil down to really, really cheap. Some people know how to get the price of books down drastically and create access to millions of books people otherwise wouldn't have had if all they had was one Barnes & Noble and a local bookstore. Some people like Sam Walton and Steve Jobs are just really good at getting iPhones in the hands of the masses. Sam Walton, really good at getting a lot of products and services and offering tens of millions of low-skilled people entry-level jobs, such as myself. I was grateful to work at Walmart when I didn't have much experience. So genius comes in many forms. For the same reason we see drastic inequality and all those other aspects of life, we of course would expect to see it. It's not some thing that's, oh, this is uniquely capitalist. This is uniquely a result of the free market. This inequality is what happens when people embrace any sort of degree of freedom. Now, it's important when we get to the state and in discussions about government. Well, if inequality is so bad, wouldn't it apply also to the state? I mean, isn't it pretty unequal that the state gets a monopoly on guns, that if they hear about other people having the guns, they get to raid the church of people who, by rumor, have some of these guns, and then when they kill a bunch of people inside, it's not called a mass shooting or something. We need FBI control as a result of it. It's just considered, oh, there was a siege and fire erupted. Oh, this was something terrible. Yes, the ATF initiated the conflict, but where is the equality in saying it's okay when government does it, it's really bad when the Vegas shooter does it? When these people do it, well, that's them enforcing the law. But if something happened at Sandy Hook or in El Paso, Texas, oh, that's something so terrible. Wounded Knee Massacre, take that. Well, that's government. If people really embraced equality, they would say, well, look at all the terrible things government has done, therefore we need gun control for the government. Well, of course not. They have one standard for one group and a different standard for another group. Here's another case of government inequality that the leftists who really support inequality should be focusing on. There was a law by Franklin Roosevelt, AOC's favorite president, that he just confiscated the nation's gold, like overnight, by writing words down on paper. What percentage of people have the legal right to confiscate gold from millions of complete strangers by force and cage them if they resist handing over their gold? Isn't that unequal? I mean, isn't it pretty unequal that he can just write words down on paper and put 120,000 people in FEMA camps? I'm sorry, re-education camps. But FEMA camps, those things would never exist. Government would never put people in internment camps against their will. That appears to be great inequality in society. Also, how is it terrorism when some radical Islamists do it? But this is just engaging in war and foreign policy, and all is, fair in love and war. How is this not terrorism? How is this not mass murder? This is like every mass shooting that's ever existed in America taken place within like 3 days, totally aiming at civilians. Isn't it unequal that government gets to draft people? I mean, government gets to engage in forced labor. Now, of course, it's under the guise of selective service and mandatory public assistance and all this other stuff. But if we really want to embrace equality, we can't say government has the right to engage in forced labor against the will of men, but everyone else has to act voluntarily. If you believe in equality, the draft is illegitimate. Also, if we're just talking about, the Koch brothers got billions of dollars. I just saw an article. Amazon got $11.2 billion last year alone. How greedy, how terrible. Well, Amazon and Walmart and the likes have done more for the poor than all other government programs combined. Also, government got $4.746 trillion last year alone. How many organizations get 4.7 trillion or around 4.7 trillion? And as we discussed earlier, it's not just like, well, some people get more than others. Government has a completely unique way of financing itself through force, as opposed to everyone else who, if Amazon can't get money from me voluntarily, well, they don't get any money. Blockbuster couldn't get enough money voluntarily, so they went under. Government just takes it by force. That's why so much of what they produce is garbage. Compulsory education. Is it fair? Is it equal? Will the proponents of equality say the Catholic Church has the right to force kids to go to school and has the right to force parents to fund the schooling because it's for the greater good of the children? Or does the state, does government, have a monopoly on forcing you to fund education and forcing kids to attend the education that the state provides? Isn't this unequal? What if the Koch brothers said, you have to give us money for Koch University and your kids have to attend Koch University for the greater good of the public well-being? Well, of course you would say that that's totally unequal. Isn't it unequal that this group of people gets to make laws that 330 million strangers have to abide by or they get caged? Even if the laws were made, a century ago by people who you nor your grandparents nor great-grandparents ever voted for, you still have to abide by their rules. Is that equal? How many organizations can do that? Isn't that embracing inequality? What percentage of people have the right to initiate taxes? In other words, I would just tax people 1%, a very modest 1%, and then retire and buy up. I hear Little St. James Island is going on the market soon. I would only collect money by taking 1% of your income, killing all those who resist, and I would spend it back into the public, which would grow the economy, according to Krugman. So it's legitimate, of course. If I can't initiate taxes, or if I can't force people to pay taxes, well, then I can't vote for someone to do it on my behalf. So if I don't have the right, government doesn't have the right. Saying government has a monopoly on taxation is unequal. How about the social contract? If government's all about equality and the crusaders for equality really cared about inequality, wouldn't they recognize that that in this social contract of government, if we take, for example, a tax protester like Mr. Schiff here, who recognized that paying money to criminals engaging in immoral actions is unjustified, so he didn't do it, well, he went to jail. Why is that okay? Well, it's okay because there's a social contract. Yes, you have to pay, but in return, you get protection from the government. Well, what happened on 9/11? Or rather, September 12th. Did government disband? Did people sue government and government have to give us all money for not protecting us? No. So if you don't pay, government puts you in jail. If government doesn't hold up their end of the contract, their budget increases radically and they get to spy on everyone, and the military-industrial complex gets even more power than it previously did. Isn't that unequal? Well, the social contract between two parties only applies to one. Well, there was an official case about this in 1981. Warren v. District of Columbia is an often quoted District of Columbia, quote, Court of Appeals case that held that the police do not owe a specific duty to provide police services to citizens based on the public duty doctrine. In other words, they just have to give a general sense of security. Well, even that they don't uphold because in civil asset forfeiture alone, they take more money by force from peaceful people than all the robbers in America. So it's not even clear that they provide a general sense of security. And if you believe in equality, that means that any security company that provides security has the right to tax people and regulate them and force people to fund them. Because, in exchange, they get their security services. But of course not. We realize morality applies consistently. How about the Federal Reserve? How about one group of people, by a law made in 1913 by Woodrow Wilson, have the right to print the nation's money supply and have a monopoly on determining interest rates? Isn't that unequal? Why is that inequality? A monopoly on currency production. Isn't that unequal? The leftists again are out saying we need the government to have a monopoly on AR-15s. They're not saying they shouldn't exist. They're saying only the state should have them. That is, quite literally, probably the most unequal thing you can do, is give one people a monopoly on firearms. It's not just like automobiles or, if Twitter was a monopoly on social media, as inconvenient as that would be, you could still do other things. But look, for the same reason, the Hells Angels don't have the right to monopolize AR-15s. The mass murdering state doesn't either. Apologies to any Hells Angels watching for comparing your organization to something like the government. So in short, the wrong enemy is the rich or the 1%. The actual enemy is anyone who achieves their ends violently or through the state, as opposed to people who acquire products and services voluntarily. This is the true divide in society, not rich versus poor, not American versus Haitian, not white versus black, not old versus young. It's voluntarism versus violence. So in libertarianism, the natural law, equality, and rights would be everyone has the exact same rights. No one has any more or less rights than anyone else, since rights are not created by humanity. That's important to recognize. If rights cannot be created, only delegated in certain situations based on the consent of the rights haver. So if I don't have the right to do something, government doesn't have the right to do it on behalf of, they represent me. If I don't have the right to tax, I can't vote for government to tax on my behalf. That is what Mark Passio, the author of this image, means when rights cannot be created by humanity. Because they exist objectively and inherently in nature, no human being or group of human beings is actually capable of granting rights to anyone else, nor is any human being capable of revoking such rights from anyone else. So, in short, the libertarian says, we are all equal. No person has the right to initiate violence against anyone else. Thank you for watching. Keith and I don't tread on anyone.